So this was part of a larger video I found about installing fence and stuff. And this is about installing the Common Sense Fence system by Geotek. Their corners, they call them the MULE corners. And I'm going to give some of our experiences as compared to the video the company put out.
The first step after receiving all the materials for your common sense fence is to identify and become familiar with all the components. Lay out everything you've got and count all the parts against your order. Now it's time.
I can't emphasize how important that is. We wound up missing all total one nut, 9 washers, 7 set screws. One of our aluminum inserts was not drilled correctly, and we were missing 3 brace posts initially, and we were missing, or the hub tool for the hand tool for the augers was not welded correctly. That being said, the company's customer service was amazing. As soon as I contacted them, they overnighted me everything we were missing. And so it was fine. It was just, I would absolutely double check that you have everything you need and not just look at that you have the bags, but that everything in the bags is supposed to be there.
Time to start installing. Determine where you want your first corner or end. You will put in all the corners, ends, and changes of direction first. Set out the corner post and braces needed for this first corner or end. We'll start this demonstration with a 4-foot corner post. 5- and 6-foot corner posts need additional installation steps. We'll cover that later.
They really don't cover that later. They talk a little bit about it. But the 5-foot and 6-foot brace corners also have horizontal braces that you have to install. We found that helpful to have at least 2 people at a minimum. 3 people made it easier so that someone could sit in the middle, hold it level, while the other 2 people were connecting the other 2 ends. So extra hands will make that much easier.
Put the aluminum insert and set screws in the bottom of the corner and brace posts.
This is another thing that if you have a lot to do, I would recommend kind of assembly lining this step. It was kind of hot and buggy when we installed our fence, so we did this step all in the garage where it was cooler and less buggy. We went through and did the aluminum inserts into every single one of our vertical posts and diagonal posts. This was also how we discovered that we were missing some set screws and we were one of those aluminum inserts was not drilled correctly. So if you have a lot to do, but we'll speed up the process a little bit.
Take out 9 inches of dirt and screw the anchor straight down until the top of the anchor shaft is even with ground level.
So this is different than my directions. I don't know if that's because they're doing a 4-foot post and ours was a 5-foot post, but our directions said to dig a full 9 inches out and that we should get the auger, the top of that auger, to be 6 inches below ground. We found that 6 inches below ground was too low. We almost always wound up having to back it out a little bit in order to get the vertical post to actually connect to it. So I do think 6 inches is definitely too low. We wound up with 4 inches is what we wound up backing it up to, but I would say probably 3 or 4 inches is a better bet for that.
Next, measure out 51 inches for a 4-foot system and stick the anchor into the ground in line with the wire run.
This was another place where we did it a little bit differently. We weren't right in line with the wire run. We were slightly outside of it. I felt that when we had it right in line with the wire run, that it was kind of putting some pressure on the wire itself, or in this case, we used electric braid. And so I liked to have it just a little bit off of, and we chose to put it outside of the wire so that the electric fence is between our animals and the brace posts. So we did that a little differently than the company did.
You do not dig a hole for the brace anchors. Start the brace anchor straight down and screw it in until the flighting is just under ground level.
That will be much harder if you have clay soil, which we have. Trying to get that auger just under the ground without having a pre-drilled hole was one of the hardest things to do. We did wind up finding at least 3 little loamy spots where it went in as easily as this video demonstrated. But if you've got heavier soil, that's going to be a lot more work, and just be prepared for that.
Now pull the anchor over toward the post while screwing it into the ground.
again, for us, that was like almost virtually impossible to just pull it over. What we wound up having to do for most of them was to actually dig out a little bit of dirt around the auger itself and also kind of behind it. So you're pulling it towards where your vertical post is going to be. So on the away from the vertical post. When I say behind, that's where I'm referring. We had to dig some of that out and water it and let some of the water soak into the ground. That was the only way we could get these diagonal augers to tip over like that and to screw them in.
It's a good idea to check the angle of the brace when this auger is halfway in.
That is probably one of the best tips I got from this video. However, when she's about to do it, she's going to very lazily just eyeball it. I would recommend putting that vertical or that diagonal shaft onto the diagonal piece onto that shaft and really check your angles. And we had to do it more than just once. We had to do it a lot.
Slide the corner post over the first shaft and hold the brace post next to the brace shaft to see where it will be on the corner post. It should meet the corner post about 7 holes or 14 inches down.
So yeah, again, we actually put it on to get a good measure, and it changed a lot. One thing that they don't mention here that was kind of frustrating for us, you're supposed to measure from that vertical post, right? And she just set that vertical post onto her vertical auger. But for us, because they told us to dig the hole so deep and because they told us to have that auger down so far, that vertical post wasn't, if we just put it like just set it there, it was never in the right spot. It would be down too low. So for us, we wound up having to actually physically position that vertical post at, for us, 5 feet, and then do all those measurements. So again, I don't know if that's just a difference between the 4-foot and the 5-foot corners, but for that piece, I would recommend actually putting the vertical post on where you want it, setting the set screws, and then doing the rest of this.
The handles of the install tool should be at ground level if the angle is correct.
That was not true for us. It almost always wound up hitting the ground to the point that we would have to dig out a little trench so that we could actually finish spinning the hand tool far enough to get it all the way, to get that auger all the way underground like we were supposed to.
If the angle is not correct, simply screw backwards a couple of turns and adjust the angle when you start to screw it back in.
Again, depending on your soil, if you're dealing with heavy clay, you're going to have to unscrew it a lot for it to actually make a difference in the angle. Again, depending on how far off. If you're only off by an inch or two, you'd probably be fine. But some cases we were off by 5 or 6 inches, so we had to basically undo it and then redo it.
Screw in the brace anchor until the top of the shaft is just below ground level. Now dig a little dirt out from around the shaft. This allows the fiberglass tube to slide over the shaft. Repeat this process for the second brace. Slide the corner post over its anchor shaft. Align the pre-drilled hole straight down the fence line for an end post, or split the difference for a corner post or change of direction.
So here's another place where we ran into some difficulty. For us, most of our vertical posts, those holes were not drilled straight through. So I would be on one side convinced that the angle was correct, and my husband was on the other side, and from his perspective, it was wrong. And it took us a corner or two before we realized it's because they weren't drilled straight through. So the only side that really matters is the side where your fence is. So decide, what side of the post the fence line is running. That's the side where it has to be lined up correctly. One other complicating thing is sometimes the holes weren't drilled straight down the post, they kind of went at an angle. So you're going to have to kind of split the difference.
Tighten the set screws as much as you can.
I don't see how one person is doing this. Again, maybe it's because they didn't have their shaft all the way down, so maybe it just was sitting in the right position. But for us, if we just let that fiberglass tube go, it would fall too far down and be below ground, below where we needed it. So what we did is we would actually measure out where 5 feet was on that post. And then we'd use something that we'd sit on the ground so that we could kind of have line up that mark, line up the 5-foot mark with the thing on the ground just to get things lined up. But even then, someone had to physically hold it there while the other person turned those set screws, because I could not like these things aren't light, so I could not hold it in position because you also want it somewhat level and you also want to get those holes aimed in the right direction. And there's just no way I could do all of that with one hand and turn these set screws. So I again, I'm not quite sure how they're doing this with one person. There's no way we could have done this without two people.
Make sure the connections are below ground level. Slide the brace strap over the corner post, go down 7 holes, and fasten the brace or braces to the corner post with the bolt, washer, and nut.
I find it truly amazing that she was able to get those diagonal things to just be exactly where she needed them. I don't think we ever did. You do have some wiggle room here, both in terms of you can pull it kind of, it's not set hard on that shaft, the brace isn't, so you can move it a little bit. And usually there's some flexibility. So often, as long as, you know, we would kind of check, can it stay here? Sure, as long as it can stay here. But again, she managed to get them beautifully lined up. That was never our experience.
Now level the corner by sight or use a level. Try to lean the corner back 1/8 bubble to allow for any settling when the wires are tensioned.
Again, that gets kind of challenging because the diagonal braces are going to be pulling on it, and until you get them set, they'll kind of pull it a little bit. So we would kind of level that vertical post before we even started the diagonal posts, and then kind of double check things with the diagonal posts. There was always a little bit of wiggle room, which is, I think, both a good and bad thing about this system. So we wound up not being quite as picky about the level for anything but the gate braces. The braces that are like holding the hinges for our gate, those we tried very hard to get level, but we stopped caring. For the other ones, we just kind of eyeballed it. We'll see. Obviously, we haven't had our fence up very long, so maybe long term this will be a regret. But as of now, we stopped caring so much about that level.
Once leveled correctly, tighten the set screws as much as you can on the brace posts and backfill the dirt.
So again, one of the things that was a struggle for us is we would get that vertical post level, but then if you let go of it, depending on how deep you dug that hole for the diagonal brace, if you let go of everything, the diagonal brace would often pull, like physically pull your vertical shaft out of level. So again, really struggled to see how one person could do this. We needed, once we got things sort of eyeballed leveled, we needed one person to physically hold that vertical post in its correct position while the other person did the set screws for the diagonal braces, because those diagonal pieces would physically pull the vertical post out of level, out of whatever angle you wanted it to be at. So again, really, you're going to want two people. He also mentioned backfilling. Yes. Sometimes by the time we were done with all this, I was tired, it was late, ugh, and I was like, I can backfill later. It's much easier to backfill when the dirt is still soft and freshly dug. If you let it sit out in the hot sun and then it gets rained, it gets be a pain. So backfill right away.
That's it. Here are the differences for 5 and 6 foot tall systems. First, the brace clamps need to be slipped onto the brace tubes before the aluminum inserts are installed.
That's true for the diagonal posts no matter what. So I'm not sure why that was special about the 5 and 6 foot. The diagonal braces absolutely need to have those things on right away.
The measurement out for the brace anchors is 65 inches for 5 foot and 72 inches for the 6 foot. These measurements will change for all fence heights when installing a corner or end on a steep slope. Next, for attaching the brace clamp, count down 8 holes for the 5 foot and 9 holes for the 6 foot.
We weren't super picky about the two. We knew one of them, one of those little clamp things had to be at 8. And the other one we either put above or below, but we were kind of flexible on how far above or below. That wound up biting us in the butt when we actually got to putting up the electric braid, because when some of them I had at 7 and 8, some of them were 8 and 9, some of them were a little above 7 and 8, and some were a little below. But I wound up taking out like a huge chunk of my post that I can't run wire on because it's not, like, those braces are in the way. So I would advise putting the two clamps, one that has to be at the correct position, 7, 8, or 9, depending on how tall your fence is, and put the other one right, like directly above it or directly below it. It will make your life easier when you get to actually putting up the fencing material itself.
Let's take a moment to talk about the anchors. It's important to note that the amount of torque it takes to screw the anchor into the ground is directly related to its pull-out force. As the anchor goes deeper, it should continually get harder and harder to turn. If it is getting hard to turn when the anchor shaft reaches ground level, the anchor is in good soil and will hold. The standard 6-inch auger can be used in more than 85% of all applications. If the anchor turns easily all the way down, the anchor did not get into good soil that will hold. To solve this, add a 12 or 24-inch extension and screw the auger deeper into the ground until the anchor gets more difficult to screw in. If you know the ground is loose sand, peat, or swampy, you may opt for the 10-inch auger. 10-inch augers will give you more pull-out resistance. In very hard, dry soil, get additional help for added down pressure and turning power. For very rocky conditions, a 4-inch anchor may be necessary. This is a shorter shaft with 4-inch flighting, which will allow penetration in rockier soils. Sometimes a little back and forth motion with quick snaps forward will help get by some rocks.
And sometimes you accidentally hit your drain tile that you forgot about. So you're putting anchors into the ground. You really got to double check to make sure, think about what's buried. Obviously, hitting power lines would be very bad, hitting your septic or sewer lines, hitting natural gas lines, or in our case, we ran into our drain tile system. So always double check about what is under your ground before you put in these augers.
For bedrock, a rock anchor may be necessary. Jackhammer a hole into the bedrock and cement the shaft into the rock. As you can see, every soil condition has been addressed and handled. It's important to note that if the fence is trying to push the brace anchor into the ground, if you hit a rock or other obstruction which prevents the auger from going any deeper, that is fine. The brace anchor will be under compression, pushing down into the ground, and the post will be solid. The anchor shafts are adjustable in the fiberglass posts. Basically, you need to get the corner auger down far enough to hold and the brace anchor until it will go no further. Now that all corners, ends, and changes of direction are in place, it's time to start putting up wire or electro braid.
Okay, so we're going to stop here for now for this chunk of the video. I hope that helped answer any additional questions people might have if they are putting up this kind of corner system. If there were any additional questions, feel free to email me at lanternfarmmn@gmail.com, and we look forward to helping you out with the next video.